The phone rang at 2:07 in the morning. Not a text, not a notification, a full sharp ring that sliced through the tiny apartment like a fire alarm. Daniel Harper jerked awake instantly, heart pounding before he even reached for the phone. Beside him, his 6-year-old daughter shifted under the blanket on the pull-out couch they shared. Her small hand searched sleepily for him. "Daddy, it's okay, sweetheart," he whispered quickly. "Go back to sleep." But his stomach was already tight. Nobody called at 2 a.m., unless something terrible had happened. He grabbed the cracked phone from the milk crate beside the couch and answered in a rough whisper. "Hello?" A woman's voice broke through the line, shaky and panicked. "Please don't hang up." Daniel frowned, confused. "I think you have the wrong number." "No, wait." Her breathing sounded uneven, like she'd been crying. "Please, I didn't know who else to call." In the background, he heard muffled voices. A car door slamming, rains, then silence. "I'm stranded outside Greystone Medical Center," she said. "My driver left. My phone is dying, and my son is upstairs in surgery." Daniel sat up straighter. "You should call family." "I did." The answer came too fast, too broken. No one came. Daniel rubbed a tired hand across his face. He worked construction during the day, stocked shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week, and had exactly $34 in his checking account until Friday. He was exhausted in ways coffee couldn't fix anymore. He should have apologized and hung up. Instead, he looked at the little girl sleeping beside him and heard himself ask, "Are you safe?" The woman hesitated. "I don't know." Rain battered the windows harder. Daniel closed his eyes for 1 second, then sighed. "Stay where you are." 25 minutes later, his truck pulled into the hospital parking lot with a cough and a squeal from worn brakes. The rain came down in silver sheets under the parking lot lights. And there she was, a woman in a dark coat standing beneath the emergency awning, soaked despite the cover overhead. She held herself stiffly, arms crossed tight against her chest, but fear still leaked through every inch of her posture. Daniel noticed 2 things immediately. First, she looked rich. Second, she looked completely alone. When he stepped out of the truck, she stared at him uncertainly. "You came?" "Yeah," he said awkwardly. "You called?" Up close, she looked younger than he expected, maybe late 30s, beautiful in the exhausted kind of way that comes after too much pressure and not enough sleep. "I'm Daniel Clare." She glanced toward the hospital doors again. "My son had an allergic reaction tonight. Severe. They rushed him into emergency surgery after complications." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was in such a hurry leaving a corporate dinner that I forgot my purse in the car service. Then the driver left after waiting 20 minutes. Daniel blinked. "You couldn't get another ride." "My phone died before the app loaded." "And your family?" A painful silence settled between them. "Busy," she finally answered. That single word told him everything. Daniel nodded slowly. "Well, you shouldn't be standing out here alone." For the first time since arriving, her eyes softened. "You really came for a stranger. Somebody should." "Ah." 3 hours later, they sat in the hospital cafeteria drinking terrible coffee while surgeons worked upstairs. Daniel had called his elderly neighbor to listen for his daughter until morning. Claire hadn't stopped apologizing for dragging him into this. But the strange thing was he didn't mind being there, maybe because he understood fear. 3 years earlier, his wife had died from a sudden aneurysm while grocery shopping. One minute she existed, the next minute she didn't. Since then, Daniel had lived every day terrified something else would be taken from him, too. His daughter, his apartment, the fragile little life he was barely holding together. "You look tired," Claire said quietly. He laughed once. "That obvious? You have paint on your boots." He glanced down. "Long day. What do you do?" "Whatever pays." Something flickered across her face then. Not pity, respect. That surprised him. Most wealthy people looked through men like him. But Claire listened carefully when he talked about his daughter, Lucy. She smiled at the story about Lucy insisting ketchup counted as a vegetable. And when he admitted he sometimes skipped meals so Lucy could have enough, Claire's eyes quietly filled with tears. "You love her very much," she whispered. Daniel stared into his coffee. "She's all I've got." For a moment, neither spoke. Then a doctor entered the cafeteria. "Miss Bennett?" Claire stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. The doctor smiled gently. "Your son is stable." Claire covered her mouth as the breath left her body in a broken sob. Daniel instinctively caught her elbow before she collapsed. And suddenly, this stranger was crying against his shoulder like she'd known him for years. At sunrise, Claire finally explained who she really was. Daniel nearly dropped his coffee. "You own Bennett Technologies?" She nodded sheepishly. The name was impossible not to recognize. Billion-dollar company, news interviews, magazine covers, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. Daniel stared at her stained coat and exhausted eyes. "You don't look like the people on TV." Claire laughed softly through lingering tears. "Because TV doesn't show panic attacks in hospital waiting rooms." That line stayed with him because suddenly she didn't feel like a billionaire. She felt like every terrified parent who'd ever prayed for their child. Human. Just human. Around 8 a.m., Daniel stood to leave. I should get home before Lucy wakes up completely. Claire stood too quickly. Wait, something desperate entered her expression. You can't leave yet. Daniel frowned slightly. My daughter. I know, she struggled for the words. Nobody stayed tonight. Not my board members. Not my ex-husband. Not my assistant. Nobody. Her eyes locked onto his. But you did. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. Claire reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a business card. At least let me repay you. He didn't take it. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. No, he said gently. You don't? And he meant it. Kindness wasn't supposed to come with invoices. That seemed to hit her harder than anything else because tears rose in her eyes again. You really expect nothing? Daniel smiled tiredly. Lady, I'm just a dad trying to survive the week. For the first time all night, Claire truly smiled and it changed her whole face. 3 days later, Daniel got fired. The construction company lost a contract and half the crew got cut without warning. By noon, he sat inside his truck, gripping the steering wheel while panic swallowed him whole. Rent was due in 9 days, Lucy needed winter shoes, and his bank account had $19. He didn't know how to tell his daughter. His phone rang, unknown number. He almost ignored it. Hello, Daniel, Claire said warmly. Can you come by my office? He blinked. What? Please. The Bennett Technologies headquarters looked like another planet compared to Daniel's world. Glass walls, marble floors, people in suits moving with purpose. Daniel felt painfully out of place in his faded jeans and work boots. But Claire greeted him herself, and when she saw him, she smiled like she was genuinely relieved. I'm glad you came. Inside her office, sunlight poured across the skyline behind her. Then she handed him a folder. Daniel frowned. What's this? A job offer. He stared at her. I'm not qualified to work here. You managed 2 jobs while raising a little girl alone? Claire replied. You stayed all night helping a stranger, expecting nothing in return. You kept calm during a crisis. You showed more leadership in one night than half my executives. Daniel looked speechless. Claire leaned forward slightly. My company runs a community outreach division, repairing housing for low-income families. The program's been failing because nobody leading it actually understands the people. We're trying to help. She paused. You do? Daniel swallowed hard. The salary printed on the page made his vision blur. It was more money than he'd ever earned in his life. I can't believe this. Yes, you can, Claire said softly. Because kindness matters and people like you matter. Daniel looked down suddenly, embarrassed by the tears filling his eyes. After a moment, he whispered, I just answered a phone call. No, Claire corrected gently. You answered a human being? 6 months later, Lucy danced through the aisles of her new apartment, holding a tiny goldfish in a plastic bag while Daniel unpacked boxes nearby. The apartment wasn't fancy, but it was safe, warm, stable. And for the first time in years, Daniel could breathe without fear sitting on his chest. A knock sounded at the door. Lucy ran to open it. Miss Claire. Claire laughed as Lucy threw her arms around her legs. Behind Claire stood her son, healthy now, holding a video game controller for Lucy. Daniel watched the mentor with a quiet smile. Sometimes life changed because of giant moments, and sometimes it changed because a tired single father answered the wrong phone call at 2 a.m. and chose kindness instead of convenience. The world called people like Daniel ordinary, but Claire knew better because in the worst night of her life, an ordinary man had shown up, and that kind of humanity was rarer than success, wealth, or power. It was the kind of thing that saved people.